Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here in such a distinguished and important place before this important gathering. I started my student career in Delhi University in St. Stephen's College to become a physicist because I was very interested in Indian philosophy and wanted to bridge the gap of philosophy and theoretical physics. And I went overseas for my PhD in physics, but I switched to computer science and started a career in the computer industry, and then telecom, and then had my own companies. And in the mid-90s, I decided to leave that and start my other journey, which is what I'm now doing, which is to understand our civilization better, our history better, what makes India different, what is better about it, worse about it, how to use our traditional knowledge along with modern knowledge to move forward, both for India and for the rest of the world. So I've lived in the US a total of 40 years and never missed a year when I didn't come to India. Typically I'm coming 3-4 times a year, so I'm very well connected with the Indian soil and Indian way of thinking. One of the projects we did, which might interest you because of your scientific background, is, there is a famous 30-volume series that was done by Joseph Needham in Cambridge on the history of Chinese science. And this made a big difference on the Chinese position in the world, because every library, every center in the world that studies China has this collection. And so China is not considered some primitive, mystical, backward society traditionally, but a very developed, advanced society throughout its history because of its contribution. Nobody had done something like that for India. So my foundation decided that we'll do 20 volumes on history of Indian science and technology. We've been in this project single-handedly for 12 years. And we decided that each volume will cover one topic, and it'll be done by one or more Indians based in India with international peer reviews and so on. We've published 9 volumes already. These are available, and they cover things like history of Indian metallurgy, water harvesting, the Harappan and Indus Valley civilization, ancient science, ancient technology, and we will be doing things like textiles and medicine and agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, all these things. And to prevent quackery or chauvinism, which can spoil the reputation of scientific work, we only include what is verifiable with empirical evidence. So for instance, if someone says there were nuclear bombs in Mahabharata, we want them to show us a crater with radioactivity. And until they can show us a crater with radioactivity, it does not satisfy the empirical evidence. I'm sure all of you being nuclear scientists, you know that it would not be possible to have had nuclear bombs with no trace of radioactivity. So that is a test. Now if you meet that test, within that test you can find fantastic things about steel which did not rust and which has a few microns coating of phosphorus or something interesting. So the issue is, how did they do this, what seems like nanotechnology in those days, how do they do this? You find amazing things in Harappan tiles, the way these tiles are manufactured, and a decentralized Indus-Saraswati civilization with Dholavira and Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, 2000 sites. Many paradoxes about how things were done, which makes it more interesting. And then weights, the standard weights, which are binary, the ratio is 1, 2, 4, 8, like that, weights. And the way the streets and lanes and the water is managed and all that is exceedingly sophisticated. How the economic history of India until 1750 was very advanced. More than 24% of the GDP of India, of the world, was in India, and about a similar number in China. And over a 100-year period from 1750 onwards, India's GDP declined, manufacturing output declined, and that's when the West became very industrialized. So we're interested in studying these kind of things to counteract the view that India's spiritual, background and advancement and mysticism made Indians otherworldly and not capable of solving practical problems and materialistic problems, because Indians actually have been doing both. There is great philosophy, there is great mathematics and linguistics and all kinds of fantastic theoretical studies, but also enormous amounts of developments at the same time which are of a very practical nature which affect society. So this is an interesting problem area to understand. And one of the paradoxes is that there are several texts which give amazingly accurate predictions, like the value of pi, the value of the velocity of light. There are sutras which give pretty good values, but there's no proof of how you got it. There is no evidence of measurement of that kind. So how was it developed, and was there a new methodology? Was there a state of consciousness that somehow the ancients were able to achieve, and in that state of consciousness have an intuition, have a unity with some object that they're looking at? Because the rishis talk about the ability of human beings to achieve a state of consciousness where the subject-object, the object of inquiry, is unified with the subject. There is no subject-object separation, and it is a quality where there is a total knowledge of what you are observing. So the observer-observed unity brings about a different kind of insight, and it is not something we can fully understand today, because I don't know if there are people today who can demonstrate that. But the evidence is that whatever predictions they made seem to be in many cases quite amazingly accurate. So the question that this leads to is whether there is such a thing as inner sciences, empirical inner sciences. Outer science has to satisfy the empirical criteria that it should be verifiable, it should be reproducible. So if you do an experiment, somebody else should be able to do it, and if they satisfy all the requirements, it should produce the same results. Well, the yogis claim that there is an inner science which is also verifiable, that if you follow a certain process for long enough and in a clean environment, just like you have to have a very clean room to conduct a high energy particle physics or any kind of a very sophisticated chemistry experiment. So similarly, the equivalent of an inner clean room has to be created. The inner silence, inner stillness has to be created. And if certain processes are carried out, you will observe certain things, and this is verifiable by others. So this claim, and I'm not saying it is true or false, but this claim is the basis of what's called Adhyatma Vidya, or inner sciences. And this Adhyatmic knowledge is the basis of a huge amount of tradition that has evolved in our country. Now, this is the basis of higher truth in Indian tradition, contrasted with the traditions of the West, which rely on history of a prophetic lineage. Some prophets come, historically unique, historically exclusive, prophetic lineage. So the only way you can know the truth is to believe in their history, because you cannot ever have that experience yourself. The difference in the case of Indian claim is that you can have that same experience yourself, even if it is very rare, even if it is very difficult. But there's always, in every period, in every century or so, there are always one or two great exemplars who replicate that experience. And so that same knowledge gets refreshed and retransmitted for the new generation. So we are less reliant on history of the discovery, because we can empirically reproduce it ourselves. So this is a very interesting distinction between Indian traditions and Western traditions, where in the Western traditions it is theoretically non-reproducible, and there are good logical arguments why it is simply impossible to reproduce what was one-of-a-kind event, whereas in the Indian tradition it is always possible to reproduce any accomplishment or any claim of a higher exalted experience that somebody had. So this methodology being a scientific claim, has nurtured a tradition of inquiry, free thinking, debate, argumentation, proving somebody wrong and replacing it with something better of your own, without any fight. Like in Europe, there's been a big fight between science and religion. So when scientists come up with something new, then the religion is threatened because they are closed, and this new thing is outside their jurisdiction and it is not possible. So there's a fight, and this fight has actually never been resolved. And in this book I explain that the West is a composite, a synthesis, an artificial synthesis of the Judeo-Christian Hebraic tradition on one side, which is based on revelation, and the Hellenistic Greek tradition of reasoning, logic on the other side. These have been artificially put together, and they are not part of one philosophical worldview. Whereas in the Indian tradition, we have not artificially reached a truce or a ceasefire between fighting segments, fighting sides, but the spirit of inquiry and the spirit of debate and replacing some truth with higher truth, better discovery, in the inner realm and outer realm has always been there. So what I was calling Adhyatma Vidya or inner science is the reason why this conflict has never existed, because it is also a scientific claim. The Rishi claims I've done a certain practice and I would receive something, I've achieved something. And another Rishi comes along and he has to reproduce it, replicate it. And sometimes people come and have a different theory. So this pursuit of higher knowledge as a kind of empirical pursuit has kept has prevented a problem from the science versus religion type of conflict, as has inflicted the West in a major way. Now, what I concluded after living in the US for 40 years is that there is a thing I'm calling Western universalism. So the subtitle of this book is "An Indian Challenge to Western Universalism." Western universalism I refer to as the West's claim that its experiences are universal, its history is universal. Every society will go through the same stages the West went through. So they went through this stage of old tradition, modernity, post-modernity, so they want to know. So when they look at Indian history, they try to come up with these demarcations. And unfortunately, Indian historians have bought it. Indian historians are talking about medieval period, pre-medieval period, ancient period, modern period. But our society did not require a conflict and a contradiction to bring about change, and did not require a fight with the past, because the past was never closed. The past is open, and so can keep evolving. So we can be traditional and modern and postmodern at the same time. So this demarcation, this approach to Western thinking need not be universal. And the West's philosophies, which have emerged from this Western historical experience, have been projected as universal. So the question is, are there alternatives to Western universalism? And in this book, I'm discussing some philosophical Indian challenges. And one of them is I challenge the Western universalism claim of unique historical, non-reproducible human experiences that are the only recourse to higher truth. And this belief of theirs is what leads to a very powerful institution, church or some kind of institution, that you become dependent on them because they know the knowledge of that history and you don't. And so it's sort of like saying that the only way you can understand Newtonian laws is that there is a society which was started at the time of Newton, and they have a kind of exclusive franchise to teach you what the Newtonian laws are, and you cannot reproduce them and measure them and test them and validate them for yourself because it is not possible to empirically reproduce it. It's that sort of a claim. And this is a very major flaw in Western spiritual traditions and philosophical traditions, the over-dependence on historical absolutes, which in our case we don't have. And in this book I differentiate between itihas and history in this particular sense, because itihas is different than history because of its flexibility, and it's recontextualized for every era. It's brought into the modern context, into the present context, and it's flexible. You can change it. And the itihas need not be the necessary and exclusive means of understanding the truth. So whether an event happened or not, the point is the philosophy can be validated today. So that is very different. And this requires a society to develop yoga, to develop spiritual meditations and spiritual practices, which are all kinds all over the spectrum in India. And these techniques which are embodied, which we do in the present moment with ourselves, is the equivalent of a laboratory. So it's an inner laboratory, if you will, in which you can conduct these experiments and people can compare notes. People used to do peer reviews. There were debates which are like peer reviews, where experts who had done these things for a very long time would make claims and debate each other's claims, and it's sort of like peer reviews. So my concern, which led to the writing of this book, is that Western universalism became very powerful in the last few hundred years because of the Western colonial influence. So the West spread its universal ideas, values, morals, ethos universally. And traditional knowledge was downsized during the colonial era, and colonial knowledge was increased. And this, over a period of many generations, Indians started adjusting to this, thinking that what is being taught is in fact who they are. So a lot of information and knowledge about our own society we've gained through the gaze of Europeans. The European perspective, the European study of India and its society has become exported back to Indians, and we've downloaded this and installed these ways of thinking. That is kind of what I refer to as a colonized mind. So we may be decolonized politically, but we're still mentally colonized. We're still looking at their way of thinking. So this challenge is what I have been working on, and I intend to continue writing more books on the same subject of questioning whether there are alternatives to this Western universalism. Now China has come up with what they call Confucian modernity. Confucianism is their philosophy, and based on Confucian thought, they have started 100 institutes around the world called Confucian Institutes. They have in different countries to propagate Confucian thought. Because part of being a great civilization, they also want to have a counter to Western civilization's claim of universalism. And they want to, so there is something they are calling Confucian ethics, Confucian modernity, a Confucian way of thinking, a Confucian way of truth. So that is an alternative to, that is already a challenge which China is posing. And so I thought maybe some Indians should think about, is there an Indian alternative to Western universalism also? And that's what my project is all about. Now, I found that a number of Indian ideas have been studied by Westerners. Then after studying them, they've removed the Indian sources, claimed them to be of Western origin, claimed them to be their own, kind of plagiarism or appropriation, and put their own name on it. And this is a series of books I'm writing, which I call the U-turn theory, where knowledge starts here, it's taken somewhere, it's taken out of the Indian context, it's considered to be non-Indian but something else. A new pioneer, a new inventor puts their own name on it. Then they claim that it's part of Western history, it's derived from Western sources. And then this new westernized knowledge or new westernized claim of knowledge is re-exported to India. So a good example is there is a prominent Harvard thinker, Harold Gardner, who is touring India routinely. He comes and gives talks in Mumbai, I think, He was a few weeks ago in Bangalore speaking at Infosys, and he developed some few decades ago a pioneering theory called multiple intelligences, which said that there's many kinds of intelligences. There's emotional intelligence, rational intelligence, there's many kinds of intelligences. And this became a revolution in education. So when you educate people, you should educate them for different kinds of intelligence to make a full person. When I started researching the early period of this idea coming together, I realized the Indian influences were there, but they are not being acknowledged. For instance, I found that Sri Aurobindo wrote about planes and parts of being, that being has got many planes and many parts. And this idea of being having many planes and many parts is essentially that there are many kinds of intelligences, many levels of intelligences, many parts of intelligences that need to be nurtured to have a whole being. And also in the Nata Shastra, there is many rasas. Each rasa is a certain quality that you cultivate. So what Harold Gardner is calling multiple intelligences is a kind of a diluted version, simplified version of, with a lot of new jargon, but of something which is very traditionally found in our country. This is very interesting. Another example I found is that Swami Vivekananda influenced Tesla, Nikola Tesla, who was the great guy in energy and electricity and all that, physicist around the turn of the 19th century. There's a correspondence I discovered between Swami Vivekananda and Nikola Tesla after some talks that Vivekananda gave in his visits to Boston area and Harvard. Tesla was in the audience, and in one place Swami Vivekananda says that energy and matter are really the same thing and they're interchangeable. And Tesla does not agree with that, because at that time the physics of matter is well defined and the physics of energy is separate. And this idea that energy matter, this is 20 years before E equals mc squared came along. So there's a correspondence between them in which Swami Vivekananda keeps insisting, and Tesla is very curious about this interesting possibility but not quite sure of it. So there are influences of this sort which you will not find mentioned when they teach the history of ideas. They don't talk about this when they talk about the history of ideas. There's many other instances, like today, one of the things that is at the cutting edge of neuroscience in the West is a lot of research is being done on yogis who are very advanced yogis who can achieve a lot of higher states of consciousness and special things they can do, and Tibetan meditators. So a lot of functional MRI scans are being done to correlate what they are doing and what it does to the brain, and new kinds of neuroscience theories are being formulated. But the inventors are always the Westerners who made the observation and not the Indian who's able to produce the effect. I mean, that's like somebody runs a 100-meter dash very fast and the gold medal goes to the guy with the stopwatch who measured it, that sort of thing. So the person who's measuring the yogi writes a paper, puts it out and says, and he gives it a very special new effect, he calls it, names it somewhere, and it's considered some new kind of a scientific discovery. So I've seen how Herb Benson in Harvard studied transcendental meditation, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's transcendental meditation in the 60s and 70s, and created and patented and trademarked his own technique called relaxation response. He just changed the name. And he's a big shot at Harvard, started a multi-million-dollar R&D thing, got a lot of grants from the federal government to do biological and neurological research on it. I've looked at the research by Stephen LaBerge in Stanford, a prominent neuroscientist, cognitive scientist, who has come up with a term lucid dreaming. But when I talk to him privately, he acknowledges that he learned it from a guru, and the Indian technique is called Yoga Nidra. So he learned Yoga Nidra, gave it a different name, and he has institutes in Austria, in Vienna, and 5, 6 other places in the world, and he's become a big shot. And by the way, the US Army uses Yoga Nidra training for combat soldiers in Iraq, because they realize that to de-traumatize them, they need some, it's better than any drugs, it's better than any other mental technique that they tried. They tried many techniques and they found this Yoga Nidra to be the most effective technique. So one Mr. Miller, I think is his name, in the US, got the contract to go and conduct training. So these are some of the examples of appropriations and misappropriations of knowledge that has originated, which I would consider to be Indian approaches to science, neurological science especially, cognitive science, yoga, psychology. Certainly in the life sciences, today a lot of these ideas are being taken to the West, classified as Western origin. So the question is there something which Indian scientists can do differently? Can Indian scientists map? Can Indian scientists recover, rediscover? Is there a renaissance possible where we can do science differently? Where we can, right now the science as we have learnt is sort of a Western model, and it is applicable. You can reproduce the effects in a nuclear reactor and it works the same way. But are there theories of, like quantum physics for instance? When quantum physics came out, Einstein had a problem with it. Einstein had a serious problem with the uncertainty, idea of uncertainty. And both Heisenberg and Schrödinger were very much influenced by Vedantin thought, by Upanishads. They quoted them. Schrödinger, in fact, had a copy of Upanishads and Gita, which he studied much of his life. And philosophically, they both said that this is the only system of philosophy that makes sense with quantum mechanics, because all the Western philosophies were reductionist and not able to make sense of this. So since life sciences have started, in the West, started going towards the study, the neurological sciences going towards the study of higher states of consciousness, much of it inspired from Indian sources. And since the origins of quantum physics also had a lot to do with similar inspirations, the question is whether there is more than just this, whether the well is deeper, and whether this well needs to be explored in a deeper way. And that's my quest, and that's what I wish to bring to your attention. So this book, Being Different, discusses why preserving difference is important, because if you preserve difference, then you have alternate methods of discovery. I gave you examples already of the benefits of having a separate Indian tradition alive, because even the West is benefiting from using this methodology. And if you do not preserve the diversity, and everything gets digested and mapped and replaced as part of Western universalism, then there's only one methodology of thinking, when only one methodology of science and inquiry and philosophy and values and society. If you can keep this multifaceted approach, then perhaps there is more potential for new breakthroughs and new discoveries. I also found in this, mentioned in this book, attitudes towards chaos, or what the West considers chaos. West's idea of uncertainty, unpredictability is very uncomfortable. There's something wrong that has to be fixed, because truth should be certain. Yes, no. But in Indian logic, Greek, in Jain logic, a proposition could be true or false, or neither true nor false, or both true and false, or neither not true nor not false, and so on. So there's many values it can take in between the two extremes of true false. And now people are looking at this multi-valued logic and fuzzy logic and chaos theory. The whole chapter 4 of this book is on order and chaos, philosophically looked at from an Indian point of view, compared and contrasted with the Western point of view. And the Western point of view started with Aristotle's law of the excluded middle, which said a proposition can be true or false and that's it. And that has been dominating Western thought. Now Westerners recently are also looking at this Indian idea and quite interested in this Indian idea. And I'm wanting Indians also to start taking their own heritage more seriously. And then finally, there's a big difference I'm pointing out in chapter 5 in the area of certain Sanskrit sounds, Sanskrit vibrations, which are non-translatable. Because there are certain words whose effect is not just a conceptual meaning. You know, like if you say apple and you say it in another language, it refers to some physical object, that's it. But there are certain words which are not referring to some physical object that you can point at, but referring to some experience. And a civilization which never had that experience does not have a word for it. So you cannot replace this word with something similar that they have, which may seem similar but is not going to be the same thing. It is going to be a distortion. So the discovery of Sanskrit non-translatables, things which are not translatable, which are unique. So you can only, like yoga is yoga. You cannot say it's exercise, you cannot say it's gymnastics, you cannot say it's prayer. So there are certain words of that kind, and I've identified about 20 and given you reasons why the common translations are not valid, and I think there's many more like that. The Sanskrit philosophy, like Bhartrhari's and Panini and before that, makes clear that the more significant than the intellectual meaning of a word is its vibrational effect. So a word, a certain sound has a certain vibrational effect. It is a, you know, it's sort of like if you have a certain vibration in a system, it's not what it means, but what is its physical effect there. So this same way a word's, how it sounds is unique, and it cannot be replaced by another sound, because another sound will be a different vibration, a different signature, and will have a different effect. So the Sanskrit philosophy is very clear that basic mantras, not all conventional words like, you know, apple kind of thing, but really basic foundational, what are called bij mantras, are non-translatable because they have a vibrational effect. So one of the areas of interest I have is to do some research, empirical research on what do these vibrations mean, or what do they produce, what is the effect of these vibrations, and people are doing this kind of research. So I will stop here, and basically I've given you a quick overview of my general areas of interest, a little bit about what I think is very distinct about Indian civilization's contributions, including to science, and the contribution in this book. And I'll be delighted to take questions. Thank you very much.
Well, I just started reading your book a few days ago, and I must say I'm quite enjoying it. I have, although read just few pages. One reason could be that your thoughts resonate with my own, and many times I feel that you are expressing the things in different words, and sometimes words have been given to the thoughts for which I could never find words. So I'm really quite enjoying it. In fact, in the beginning, the things you mentioned, like your problem with the use of tolerance between different religions, and you say it should be mutual respect. I think that's an excellent way of putting the things, and I think that that's something which should be known to people, that it's not tolerance, it is mutual respect, which is quite important. And then you go on to talk about things like you don't like the use of word, if I have got it right, idol, you know, which Westerners describe it, and you say image. Of course, here I have not really fully understood, like I didn't fully understand what you said in your lecture today, the difference between itihas and history. That's a different thing, of course. It may take some time for me to understand. There is another thing Like you mentioned, was it Shri Vivekananda who talked about energy matter?
Yes.
Yeah. But the point is that, you know, such things you can talk in one context, and like E equal to mc square is in a different context. Why I am saying this is for the following reason, that in fact some years ago I was giving a talk on, I'm basically a theoretical physicist.
Good.
I was giving a talk on what you mentioned about Einstein's difficulty with understanding the basic philosophy of quantum mechanics itself. So on the famous, of course you would know it, Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox.
Sure.
After the talk, one of the professors, he came up to me and he said, Professor Puri, do you know, Ghalib said something about quantum mechanics. I said, I never knew it. And then he, said the following, and those lines I still remember, I heard them several years ago. Asle shuhudo shahido mashhud ek hai. I will explain it. Asle shuhudo shahido mashhud ek hai. Heran hu fir mushahida hai kis hisab mein. So Ghalib says that really speaking, the observer, the act of observation and the object under observation, they are all same. So I do not know what constitutes observation. And you will agree that this is what basic philosophy of, or basic premise of quantum mechanics is. But of course, obviously, Ghalib had nothing to do with the quantum mechanics. The context is different. It's a different thing altogether. So, I mean, sometimes the same thought in different contexts, it may look similar, but the meaning could be different. And I was just talking with somebody else who has read your book. So he was thinking that, are you talking about replacing one universalism with another? But my take on it was, as I understood from your first few pages, keeping in mind what you say about mutual respect, is that I don't think you are saying that. Of course, you are in best position to tell, in the sense that, are you advocating that Western universalism be replaced, very crudely speaking, by, let's say, Indian universalism? Are you saying that? I thought that you are not saying it.
Okay, these are wonderful questions, let me just write down the 3 points I got. I'll start with each of them. I think it's wonderful you read the book and you reminded me to talk about tolerance and mutual respect. So for the benefit of those who haven't, I've had a lot of experience in the West challenging some of their terms, and when you challenge a term, replace it with another term, you realize how deeply they are invested in one term and how reluctant they are to replace it with another term. I was at a conference, this has happened in many conferences, but at some interreligious conference where they were passing a resolution and all the leaders of different religions were there, and the resolution was drafted to say that we all tolerate each other. So I raised my hand and said, tolerance is actually quite insulting, because you wouldn't like your spouse to say that I tolerate you in the house, or your colleague in the office to say I tolerate you to sit next to me, or someone to invite you to dinner and say, I tolerate you to eat next to me. It shows that it's an insult. There's something wrong with you and I'll put up with you. That is what tolerance means. And tolerance, religious tolerance, has a peculiar history in Europe, when the different kingdoms had exclusive ideas, exclusive denominations of Christianity, and the others were banned. So it was illegal, criminal offense to belong to some other church. And so then they reach a truce, a treaty, which says, I'll tolerate your religion and you tolerate my religion. So it has its own peculiar history. So this is an example of taking Western universalism. Their idea of tolerance is a very big breakthrough in their history, because they had a problem we did not have. We didn't have that problem of exclusivity, where a king would say, I'll only allow citizens to have this particular faith or something like that. So the idea of tolerance to solve a problem was not needed. So I proposed that I proposed in these different resolutions, all these years I've been saying, I scratch out tolerance and I say mutual respect. Now, mutual respect means I respect you. It's not that there's something wrong with you, I respect you. That doesn't mean that my tradition is better or yours is better. I respect you for having your tradition. Mutual is very critical, because sometimes people say, would you respect Bin Laden or Hitler? And I always say that mutual respect. It means Bin Laden would be disqualified because he does not respect others. So if he were to respect others, he would no longer be Bin Laden, if he were to respect others. So my offer of mutual respect is not unilateral, unconditional respect. It is if he gives reciprocity, then only. Way, just to make an impression politically. But philosophically and theologically, they have a very difficult time accepting mutual respect, accepting legitimacy of other paths, when their own claim of exclusivity is a core requirement. It's a necessary condition for the validity of their tradition. Now, this went to there was a UN summit in the year 2000, a World Religious Summit under the UN, and they were drafting some resolutions. So I mentioned this, I had a brief discussion of this with the Hindu leader leading the Hindu delegation, and he said, yes, we will put in mutual respect. So the Vatican would not accept it, and he insisted we want mutual respect, and the Vatican said we want tolerance. So this business of tolerance versus mutual respect became a very big political scandal, and New York Times came out with a front page article that the summit might fail because of some language difficulty. They did not elaborate what it was. At the last minute, Vatican conceded. The person leading the delegation was Cardinal Ratzinger, who later became Pope Benedict. That was how high level it was. He conceded, and the resolution said mutual respect, and everybody signed it. But within a month after that, after the delegation had all gone back to their homes, Vatican issues a clarification saying that while it's okay to respect others, the other faiths are a means, a preparation for the ultimate salvation that only we can give. So it's like you're in the kindergarten, maybe you're in the 10th grade, but I'm in the PhD level. So I respect you for, preparing, but ultimately you have to come to our level. So that is a very problematic area for these people. And this little shift in terminology, if you start implementing, wherever they say tolerance, you say mutual respect, you will find that barriers will come up. And once they understand what you are trying to say, what the difference really is. So I'm glad you raised that. The second point you made is very interesting, that there may be a poetic understanding of something. It's not the same as rigorous scientific discovery. But I feel that while in Ghalib's case it may be like that, but I feel that Vivekananda is referring to this Sankhya system, and it's a very detailed taxonomy of the nature of the cosmos, the nature of reality, layers of reality that exist. And he was referring to that as the energy-matter equivalence, that they are ultimately one entity that manifests in two different ways. Not quantified, certainly, but a qualitative philosophical understanding. Sometimes a philosophical opening is a breakthrough, because then scientists are at least open to thinking like that. Because if they're not even thinking like that, then then there is a mental block. One is in a certain box. And I would say, in any case, when they write the history of ideas, when the West writes history of ideas, history of science, even these very undeveloped, non-quantitative, they like to take it back to, Plato said this and so and so. They like to take it back to their own earlier origins to show the continuity of Western thought. And as part of Western universalism, you have to show that it is untainted, uncontaminated by anybody else, and everything is self-sufficient, and we are sort of the perfect system. Whereas to bring in that certain things we got from here, certain ideas we got from there, would be a legitimate thing, and it would pierce the Western universalism, and it would bring us more towards a human universalism where many people have played a role. You see, Western civilization has digested many civilizations. It digested the pre-Christian pagans of Europe and brought in many things from them. You know, the Christmas tree was pagan, the Easter was a pagan holiday, Valentine's Day, all these kind of things. They Christianized these, and the pagans disappeared. But their ideas were taken. Similarly, the Native Americans, when the Europeans arrived, so much civilization was taken from the Native Americans, but Native Americans only live in a museum. You can see them, you go to a museum and you can see what they were like. And similarly, African cultures, so many of them finished off. So when the history of ideas and when the living, what is kept alive is exclusively a linear trajectory of Western thought, then others are no longer relevant. They are replaced. They are redundant. This is why when you go to University of Chicago, you take one of the required courses is on Western civilization, not world civilization, Western civilization. Most universities, when they teach classics in the West, they're teaching Western classics, but there's Indian classics too. Now, of course, there's pressure and a little bit they'll do here and there, but this idea of a continuous history of one civilization which is dominant and which is sort of got an absolute claim of being superior is problematic for me. Yeah, and so the reason I bring in these ideas where they have introduced, like even the yogis being studied by neuroscientists, you have to credit the neuroscientists for making value added. After all, the yogi achieves a certain state, but the neuroscientist comes up with various correlates in the brain and does calculations and figures out things and so on. You cannot say that he has done nothing. So it could be a joint discovery. It could be that in the history of ideas, you have to first credit the yogi who learned how to do this. And then you have to credit the Western neuroscientist who learned how to turn it into something more useful today or predictable today or measurable today. Whereas the yogi, it was more a qualitative thing and not quantitative. So I would say that in the history of science and technology, you have to acknowledge and be very explicit and honor all the civilizations that have made input. A huge amount of Western enlightenment, Western science came out of other places, like mathematics out of India. But very rarely you will find, some historians will know Indian origins of a lot of mathematics, infinite series, infinitesimal, these kind of things, long before the Westerners. And Bodhania long before Pythagoras. We know these things. But what's taught to the common person, including what's taught in India, unfortunately, is a very Western-centric idea. That's a problem. Your final thing about is there an Indian universalism? I don't know if there is one universalism or if there is many ways of knowing the truth. And I certainly feel that the stage we are in is a monopoly claim of a single universalism. We need to break that monopoly and create multiple ways of knowing the truth. And what that will lead to, I can't predict. Will it lead to a kind of a combination which includes all of these, approaches, or will one dominate over others? I don't know. But that's what science is about, its openness. I don't think that brute force power of colonialism should be the arbiter of deciding that the universalism of this culture is the right one. So all I'm trying to do is decolonize the methodologies that we have inherited.
Say, response to Dr. Puri's question, you referred that in India we have not given due respect to the ancient knowledge which we had. Rather, it has been a Western thought which is mostly, say, we understand or we feel that it is say, whether it is science or whether it is chemistry or whether it is physics, that is the only truth. Can you just suggest what is the origin and when it really started from your experience, please?
Well, I think it started 1,000 years ago because we had great viharas.
I'm just sorry to interrupt you. Whether it has anything when the colonialism started in India, whether it has any origin to Lord Macaulay, who is really given.
That is part of the answer. That is, I have to answer that. Sure, I understand. I think it started long before Macaulay, because India had centers of learning like Nalanda, like Takshila. These were destroyed long before the British came. They were destroyed. Muhammad Khilji's armies burnt Nalanda, and a huge library, considered the largest library in the world, many times bigger than the Library of Alexandria. And Nalanda was a university where the brightest, the cream of the cream from various parts of Asia used to come. Like today people go to MIT, Stanford, Harvard. They used to come to Nalanda to learn. And so the knowledge, the production of knowledge in these universities and these R&D centers were destroyed. So the history of Nalanda is now preserved only through foreign students, Chinese students who wrote and other students who wrote about their experience in Nalanda. That has been utilized to reconstruct the history of Nalanda. Multiple volumes have been written on that. So I would say that the destruction of Indian centers of learning, which happened long ago, long before the British period, was the beginning of this decline of R&D, indigenous R&D. And the word Bihar is actually Vihar. It's Vihar. And Vihar is the institution of learning. So there were 20, 30 big Vihars. Nalanda was just one of them. Huge number of universities there in that part of the world. So one of the most backward states and less educated states today was actually one of the centers of learning of the whole of Asia at one point in time. So this is probably what did it. Now, the Mughals they continued the manufacturing economy because they settled and became Indians. So they continued the manufacturing economy, and they built great monuments, and they invested in culture. But I think in the science of inquiry, challenging the existing knowledge is part of the paradigm, and I'm not sure how tolerant they were of people basically challenging the nature of truth. I'm not sure how tolerant they were. And the British, of course, wanted to also milk the Indian manufacturing economy and at some kind of a huge up to 90% taxation rates they had, and then gradually de-industrialize India and migrate this textile and steel industry to Britain. So part of this was necessary to create a kind of a servant mentality, a dependent mentality, and therefore education had to be changed. And this is where Macaulay comes in to sort of remove the traditional knowledge of India, remove the pride in India, and introduce a new kind of a knowledge system. School, so the traditional Pathshala, very close relationship between student and teacher, replaced by something far away. A guy called Dharma, some of you might know, he was a Gandhian who just died within the last 5 years. He actually went to England and camped out there in their old archives before there were photocopies and all that available, and manually transcribed a whole lot of East India Company records to bring back East India Company's own studies on Indian education before and after their intervention. Very interesting. How educated people were, how practical the education was in terms of farming knowledge or raising cattle or whatever, versus what it became after the intervention of Europe. So that is what happened.
Superconscious and subconscious state of mind, and during that we get some thought process, which when we come to normal state of mind, awakened state, and we speak it out without realizing or no really materialistic proof of the things. That's how some of the theories of Vivekananda, which energy and matter of the thing came, or maybe even to some extent Kekule also commented on the same way for Benjamin structure or the Kadam. Is it, and you also mentioned of vibrations. As the technology has evolved over the period of time, we have been having the equipment and devices to detect the vibrations of different kinds. In India, there is a thought, some people believe, in premonitions and getting the message from one person to the other person at a very far-flung place. And these are really nobody knows how it happens, but in the dreams, otherwise the message do go. Some people do have I think, verification of that. But is it that the phenomena as such, we have not been able to detect those vibrations or those waves which are emitted out during these states, like the people dream something here and somewhere else it is found to be true, and there have been some cases where the things which have been dreamt by individual have been found to be happening true. So is it that there is a science really in this, and this needs to be studied? We have no equipment to detect those vibrations or those waves which are emitted out or which are received or transmitted by the object and subject. That's the thing.
Yeah, I think
this is a very
philosophy
or the thought process.
Yeah, this is a very exciting question, and thank you for this. This is a very good question. I think we don't have the technology to directly measure some of these very high states of consciousness. But what the neuroscientists are trying to do is measure the effect it has, which is more macro. So there are certain discoveries they've already made where the effect of something like this can be measured, while the actual phenomenon itself is just a theoretical, extrapolation. But then one could also say nobody has seen an electron. All we've seen is a mark on a film. We've seen a mark on a film, and we infer an electron. We infer that there's an electron we haven't seen, but there's a mark on a film, and it keeps changing according to the laws of what an electron is supposed to be like. So there are things, even in the material sense, which are so small that we infer their existence from something else we can observe. So our evidence, even in the case of something of this sort, like very, very subtle things, more subtle than normal matter, we may never be able to actually see that directly, but if we can build a prediction, if we can build a model based on that assumption, and that model produces a certain outcome, and we can measure that outcome, we'll have to be scientific enough and accept it. So I think this is an exciting area of research, and I track this quite a lot, and I feel that in this area of validation of our tradition, actually the West is doing more. They are doing a lot of research in this area. I know one place near Bangalore where they are, I think it's called Vyasa or something, they are trying to do this also. Real neuroscientific effects of advanced states of consciousness. But it will be my job to keep reminding the West that when you get this breakthrough, it's a joint discovery, and you have to co-publish it with the yogi who produced this effect, and you have the instrument to measure it. And it is not that he's some footnote in the end saying some guy did it, some subject. They're calling them subjects, like some animals, some rats in a laboratory. Rats in a laboratory. So I'm just trying to make sure that the record is straight on that, because then our tradition stays alive. It is not put in a museum. It has some value, and we can discover more things.
You're not questioning the outcome, like the other postmodernists, like means that the absolute truth itself is also somewhat relative or something like that.
No, I am saying that too, because if you keep another knowledge system alive, which has a whole separate methodology, we cannot predict that its truths and the truths of normal material empirical science, external science, are necessarily going to be the same, or whether they'll be in different realms, where they will converge, whether they'll converge quickly or whether they'll remain open-ended for another 100 years or 1,000 years, we don't know. So all we know is that premature destruction or atrophy of a knowledge system is not a good idea. Without predicting who will win, is there a winner, will there be multiple winners, without taking a stand on that, because I don't know. And I'd love to be open-ended on this and leave it uncertain, because uncertainty in this area is creative.
Every civilization has its own evolution, and when they come into contact, there's a possibility of an amalgamation. So are you suggesting any insulation
No.
process or anything like that?
No. See, I want cross-fertilization, but there is a difference in this book. There is a difference between cross-fertilization, which is good, and digestion. The difference is when a tiger digests a deer, there is no more deer left. The deer is finished. What he did not need, he left it out, the skin and whatever, and what he took in and could not digest properly, he throws it out. So that is what ends up with a dead civilization which has been digested. So I do not want Indian civilization to get digested into the Western universalism. That does not mean Indian civilization should remain isolated. In fact, I would claim that for thousands of years, Indian civilization has had a very detailed interaction with China, with Middle East, with Africa, with Europe, with various parts of the world, or very slow internet. people going by boat or people going by the Silk Route, taking knowledge with them, some thinkers and philosophers coming back, some linguists going, some agriculture scientists coming back. So I think a collaboration among civilizations has existed always. It's only in recent times that one civilization was able to so strongly dominate and control everybody in the world that it was able to sort of almost squash them and finish them off. That is the problem that I don't want.
If I am not incorrect, since 712 AD, systematically Indian civilization, let it be history, let it be culture, let it be religion, everything has been smashed into bits. If I am sure it is since the Arab invasion of Sindh and with the superimposition of Macaulay and Dowdwan filtration theory or Wood's dispatch of 1854, almost many generations have come up in this country as well as elsewhere who completely depend upon the belief that has been fed into our minds by Vincent Arthur Smith or maybe Arnold Toynbee. What is your message? How to protect it? Can we protect it where whole generation of intelligentsia have developed in this country depending upon the belief that has been supplied or spoon-fed by the Britons?
Yes. So I am an example of the resistance. I'm an example of resisting this Western universalism. And I as one man can do only so much. But I'm standing up and saying, I reject this Eurocentric Indological thesis and theory of our history and origin of ideas and the paradigms and the philosophy. I reject that. And I'm proposing many alternatives. Each chapter, there are 4 major differences, metaphysical, physical, philosophical differences that I'm proposing where there's an Indian challenge to Western universalism. And chapters 2, 3, 4, 5, each of them is one big idea that could almost be like a separate book. So this is my contribution to actually try and reverse this colonialism that you are pointing out very correctly. The Indian intelligentsia has been raised on this. The trend of getting digested into the West is becoming fashionable. Many of the youth are picking up the wrong side of the West. West has some brilliant things to offer. West has good work ethic. There are many good things. We should pick up good things. But we don't have to stop being who we are. And a lot of the imitation that is going on is not of the good things of the West, but maybe the bad things. So I am very concerned about that, which is why I took early retirement when I was 44 from my business and dedicated my life since then. It's been 17 years. I'm 61 now. So 17 years I've had no job, no business, no work. I mean, I've basically put my time, 7 days a week to study this, to research, write, talk about it, and hope that other people can find value in it, can encourage this, propagate these ideas. Because I feel that with the renaissance of Indian economy, Indians for the first time in recent memory, few generations, have gained confidence. Now the question is, how do we channel this confidence? Can we not create the equivalent of Ford Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation and Carnegie Endowment and all these great think tanks and whatnot that the West created? Can we not have our very big shots put in money into new kind of research on our terms, new scientific research? This is what I'm trying to encourage. And I think with more money which we are generating and more confidence, if we can also combine that with a cultural and civilizational respect, we will actually be a much better nation, more respected by everybody else. So that is my hope. So last question.
This is in continuation with Dr. Kulshrestha's question. Salvation or liberation or realization is something coming out of yogic practices which cannot be expressed. Who has liberated? Like living liberated person. Will it be possible for the West with their modern equipments to validate this or quantify this?
See, I don't know, and I don't know how far the correlation. What you have are two realms. There is the inner realm of consciousness and spirituality, and there is the outer realm which is measurable of matter. Now, what they are measuring is a correlate. What they are trying to measure is the yogi afterwards tells them that this is what I felt, this is my experience, and then the machine tells them this is what it looked like. So they are trying to come up with correlates of the inner and outer, and how far this will go, how far the correlations can be detected, we don't know. And can they just keep going until very high states and ultimate states, or is it only going to happen till a certain level? Certainly you can tell whether a person is sleeping or awake through machines. Okay. So we know that at some level of consciousness, what your state of consciousness is, they can even measure when somebody is very angry and very, whatever, you can look at it, you tell. Now, how far can we go? How high a level of consciousness and clarity and stillness and non-dual consciousness can produce a correlate? We do not really know. So I think as scientists, we have to not sort of prejudge the outcome, because one of the things that makes us scientists is we are open to discovery. So the discovery should go on. However long it will take us, till whatever step it will take us, we should be doing it.